Hi, and welcome to part 12 of this PowerShell GUI tutorial series. In the last video, we took a look at checkboxes and we did a slight edit on our service inspector. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and show you guys what we made in the last video. So this is what we made in the last video. So let me just zoom in here a little bit. So we had this filter where we can type in our service name and we can checkbox running or stopped to show us the stopped or running services. And then we had either the choice of if both were unchecked to show nothing or to show everything. So as you can see, this one doesn't show us anything, but we can select running and stop to show both, just running or just stop. And then we have the selection here, which should work. Well, we can actually go ahead and fix that in this video. I couldn't find the code from the last video here saved on my computer, so I kind of had to make do a little bit. So that should have actually have worked. RDDG services. Go ahead and select that. So yeah, so we're going to fix that. But basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be changing these to radio buttons, and we will be seeing how we can do that and how we can group radio buttons together. So you can have multiple sets of radio buttons because by default, if you're just throwing radio buttons on there, they will all be part of the same group and only one of those could be checked. But you might have multiple sections in a window where you might have groupings of radio buttons, but they're allowed to pick one from each group. Like let's say if you had one which was a gender selection, if you wanted to have multiple options available by radio buttons, you could do it that way. And then later underneath, you could have had another selection for another thing, but then if they were all grouped together, you would only be able to pick one. Therefore, you would really only be able to answer one of those questions by radio buttons. So we're going to be going ahead and taking a look at that. And actually, I did find the problem here. So this was our code. As you can see, everything was working correctly. So let's go ahead and let's take a look to see what we can change for the radio button. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open up Visual Studio 2022. And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be opening up just a random project for WPF. And then once that opens up, what I like to do, this one might be the actual project, but what I like to do is I like to just delete the main window XML that pops up here. So the main window XML that just pops up here. And then what we're going to want to do is we are going to want to go ahead and add a existing item. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to pick our checkbox XAML file here. There's the main window, so that'll add that in here. And this should load up for us. So as we can see, we have our two checkboxes here, and we have our labels here for all the different statuses. So let's go ahead and status. All right, so let's go ahead and let's remove these two checkboxes because we won't need them anymore. And then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and add two radio buttons for now. Let's just go ahead and let's put that in there. And we are going to add a third one just for the fun of it at the bottom here. Or we can actually select two of them. We won't be doing anything with these radio buttons. This will be strictly to show you guys the difference in how we can group the radio buttons. So what we're going to do is we're just going to move the radio buttons here just to make it look a little bit nicer here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to name this one running, and then put this one, the content as stopped. And this one, we're going to put the content as test1, and this one as test2. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to name our buttons just rad underscore running for the one that says running, and rad underscore stopped for the one that says stopped. Now rad, I just use rad because it's kind of short form for radio button. And then these test ones, we're just going to name them rad test 1 and rad test 2 appropriately. Now what we're going to notice here, let me just zoom in and show you guys this little section here for radio buttons. So for radio buttons, there's what's called a group name. Now this is what's going to group the radio buttons together. So we're not going to be using this just right away. I want to show you guys the effect when we don't put a group name on these. So once we have all of those, these should be good now. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a file. We're going to go ahead and do a file, save main window XAML as, and we're going to go ahead and save that in our folder here that I have for radio buttons. All right. So let's go ahead and let's just minimize out of Visual Studio in case we'll need it. So we're going to be taking our exact code from our last video. We're just going to modify it here. So let me just modify first the folder that I'm getting the XAML file from. And now if we run this, we're going to get some errors. That is for sure. We have our radio buttons. They don't currently do anything, but that is okay. But as you can see, I could select running or stopped, but then if I select test 2, let me just zoom in so you guys could probably see that a little bit better. So I can select running or stopped just fine, but if I select test 1 or test 2, it actually pulls away. So if I had a different set of radio buttons here, we would see that we would have that problem. So the way that we would fix that is by assigning a group name. So instead of doing this through Visual Studio Code, we could just do it right in the XAML file in Visual Studio Code. So we can actually do group name equals, and make sure that your group name, this is case sensitive. So you will have to make sure that the group name here is capital G and a capital N for the name. That is very, very important. So for these ones, we're going to put this in the group of status, and we're just going to copy paste that for the down one here. And for this group name, we're just going to group these as test and test. So that should be good. So now, without changing anything, we should be able to come here and select running or stopped, but also test 1 or test 2. So let me just zoom in for you guys to show you guys that. So here we are, we can select running or stopped, and we can select test 1 or test 2 without unselecting the running or stop. So that group name is very, very important, especially if you plan on having multiple different groupings of radio buttons. So let's go ahead and let's actually edit this code here. So because we removed the checkboxes, let's go ahead and let's just remove all of that there. And then what we're going to have to do as well is we're going to have to rewrite this whole filter status. So I'm just going to cut that out for now. And besides that, that should be good. So if we go ahead and run this here, we can see we can select our items. They show up in the service name and the status just fine, like it was in the last video. And we have our filter. But of course, our filter right now doesn't work because I just removed that function. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come in our filter status here. And so right now we're only doing the text changed, and then we're going to add in the radio buttons. So if we just copy paste that code here that we had. So what we're going to want to do just to get it working without the radio buttons. So here we have, as soon as the text is changed, it's going to call the filter status, and we're going to filter the status, filter the table on the display name like, and then the text filter with the % as a wildcard. So if we go ahead and we run this now, we should be able to see if we do a print, we get the running and stopped services, but we don't get any more filtering with the radio buttons. So this is where we are going to add in some of our controls. So the first thing we're going to want to do is add an if statement in our filter status. And we are going to reference our var underscore rad underscore running. And the same property from the checkbox is actually used with the radio button. So we're going to do is checked. And we're going to do an open and close curly bracket. And then we're going to do a else. We're going to do an else if var rad stopped dot is checked, open and close curly brackets. And we're going to have an else with an open and close curly brackets, because at first we don't have any of the checkboxes selected. Now, if you did have one of the checkboxes selected by default, you would only need the if and then the else, because at that point you would know that you're either checking for running or stopped. I'm giving the user, if they don't want to pick running or stopped, they could pick both. You can even put a radio button for both, and have another else if, and then if both is selected, then you would be able to do this filter. So in our if var rad running is checked, we are going to go ahead and set our filter to display name like, and then a single quote, wrap our variable, and do a var text filter dot text, and then %, and then an and status in, and we are going to go ahead, or actually we can just say status is equal to running, and we can copy paste this filter here down here, and we can just change the running to stopped. And then what I like to do is I just like to take out the actual application of the filter to the row filter outside of our if statements. This way we're only setting the filter in the if statements, and then we're just applying that filter at the end. So that should be good. So let me just zoom out here so you guys can actually see what's going on. So this should be good for our filter status here. So now what we're going to want to do is, if we run this, we will see that it works just fine. But right now still, if we select our radio buttons, we can see that it's not working. But as soon as I change the text, it does limit it to only the running, or only that should not appear with the running here. So for some reason we have if, oh, this should be a rad stopped. And now if we do a stopped and then we do a print, we only get the stopped, we only get the run, but we want to make sure that we can actually check it when those radio buttons are checked. So as you probably guessed, all we need to do is add our var rad running dot add checked, and then open and close parentheses, open and close curly brackets, filter status. And we just need to add one more for the stopped radio button. Now, compared to the checkboxes, we actually don't need to add if it's unchecked, because we already know that with a radio button, when we check our other radio button, the other one will be automatically unchecked. So we don't actually have to handle that case. So once we have in here, we're going to type in our print. We can do running. We can go to stopped. Now, of course, it would probably be useful to have a radio button here for both. So what we can actually do to do that is we can actually come back directly into our XAML file, And all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy paste this radio button here for the stopped. And I'm just going to insert that right at the bottom here. The status is still going to be, the group name is still going to be the status. I'm going to change the name to rad both. And content is going to be both. And then the margin, I'm going to put that to 44 because we can see it's 104, 124. So to make it the same amount of spacing, it's going to be about 20 more. So that should be good. And let's just go ahead and we're just going to keep those there, actually, the two test ones. So now if we run this, we're going to see that we have our option for both. But now what we could actually do is we can do an else if var underscore rad underscore both dot is checked. And there you go. So that should be good. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm actually going to add for the radio button for both. I'm actually going to do is checked equals, oops, I believe that that's going to be is checked equals true. I believe that that's how you would spell it. I'm not 100% positive on this one, but let's go ahead and let's just see what it is. Okay, so we have a error here on line 10 for the is checked. So the is checked, the is might be capitalized. So let's see what that changes. Yeah, so the is checked is capitalized. And as you can tell, let me just zoom in here. The both was instantly checked off by default. And then we can just put print in here. And now we could just do running, stopped, or both. And the both doesn't actually work. So let's go see why that is not working here. So display name like, oh, and I know why. We actually forgot to add the add checked to the radio button of both. So let's go ahead and let's actually do that here. So var underscore rad underscore both dot add checked and filter status. Now if we run this here, we will get our print. We show both. And then we can change it to just running, just stopped, or back to both. And we can still select our items and they show up down here. And then if we select our radio buttons, it has no impact on the ones above. So that is really pretty much the gist of it for the radio buttons. They are very, very similar to checkboxes, but in the case, they might be more useful. They're a little bit easier. There's a little bit less cases to handle, but of course you are limited to only being able to check off one. So in some situations, it definitely makes more sense to have a checkbox because you can also uncheck it. With radio buttons, you have to select another radio button in order to uncheck the radio button. So if we actually just launch this again here, I can't unselect the both. So let me just zoom in here. So if I do stop, but I don't want to select stop, I have to have one checked. So that is definitely a big downside to the radio buttons, is you might be limited to what you can do. So it's definitely to figure out if a radio button would be best or a checkbox would be best. So it's really up to the application, but both of them work really, really well. They have very, very similar properties, so they're very easy to interchange. As you can see, we started off with our same application and our same code. We didn't really have to change a whole lot other than the actual checkboxes themselves, the names of them, because they're methods. are the same and their properties are the same as well. So it's just a little bit of the logic that changes, and the name, if you change the name, that is, you could give them the same name. I always like to make my uh, control names relative to what they are. So that's pretty much it. If you guys have any comments or questions, leave them down below in the comment section. If you guys have any ideas or questions that you guys would like to see a video on, leave it down in the comments down below. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe button, hit that notification bell to be notified when the next video comes out, and I will see you guys on the next video.